a set of prints broader than a man's spread hand, pressed into frozen mud along the Tanana at first light. That's what 11 men out of a fur and survey outfit swore they found in the late autumn of 1854, and 2 of them said they saw what made it. I've walked that country. Not in 1854, obviously, but I've stood in the willow flats off the lower Tanana in October when the mud freezes hard by 4 in the afternoon and holds a track like a plaster cast. And I'll tell you right now, before we go one step further, I can't put a bone in your hand. There is no specimen. No museum in Fairbanks or anywhere else has a striped hide behind glass with an interior Alaska tag on it. That's the honest starting line. Now let me tell you why I still think about this expedition at 2 in the morning. 11 men moving up the Tanana drainage as the freeze came on, running a fur line and doing a rough survey of the country. That's an ordinary outfit for the era. Nothing exotic about the men. What's not ordinary is what got written down. The journal logs a set of prints broader than a man's spread hand. That's a paw pushing 8-9 inches across, pressed into that first light mud. A wolf doesn't leave that. A big wolf tops out around 4 inches on the front pad. This was something else walking that river bank, and then it gets specific in a way that misidentification usually doesn't. 2 members of the party described a striped flank, roughly 60 yards out, through willow scrub right at dusk. 60 yards is close enough to be sure of color and pattern and too far to touch it. They didn't say a bear. They didn't say a wolf. They said stripes on a flank, low and long in the brush. Here's the detail that moves me most because it's not something a frightened man invents. They found a kill. A young moose, call it a horse-sized animal, dragged 11 feet uphill. Uphill. You need to sit with that. A wolf pack doesn't drag a moose uphill. Wolves feed where the animal falls and pull it apart on the spot. Dragging a carcass, moving it, caching it against a slope, that's cat behavior. That's an ambush predator hauling its meal somewhere private. 11 feet of drag mark in frozen ground is a signature, and the signature reads, feline. So, why isn't this settled? Why isn't the 1854 account in every textbook? Because of what survived. And look, the doubters are right about this part. The original document doesn't exist as an original. What we've got is a later hand-copied transcript. A copy of a copy, essentially, which is exactly why no serious archive will fully authenticate it. You can't carbon date the paper of a transcription. You can't check the hand of a man copying another man's words. The provenance is broken, and a broken provenance is a real problem, not a technicality. I'm not going to pretend it away. If this were my only evidence, I'd close the file. But it isn't the only thread. Out in the interior, the Athabascan oral tradition carries stories of a striped wolf. Some tellings call it a tiger wolf, a big cat-like hunter that works alone. Now, I'm careful here. Oral tradition isn't a specimen either, and I won't dress it up as one. But you've got 2 independent sources, a written account from a fur outfit and a living story from the people who've hunted that ground for generations, and they're describing the same silhouette. Striped, solitary, bigger than it should be. When 2 records that never met land on the same animal, you don't get to wave both away with one hand. So the report record is thin, and it's broken, and it's stubborn. Not enough to confirm a population. Not enough to dismiss the sightings. Let me take you to the ground itself, because the geography is where this stops being a ghost story. Here's the thing people forget about Alaska. It wasn't always an island at the edge of the map. The Bering Land Bridge, Beringia, was open for thousands of years, and at its widest it ran up to 1,000 miles north to south. 1,000 miles. That's not a bridge. That's a subcontinent of grassland connecting Siberia to interior Alaska, and it was dry, walkable ground for longer than our whole recorded history. Everything came across it. Mammoth came across. The steppe bison came across. The American lion, the short-faced bear, the caribou your hunters chase today, all of it walked that corridor in one direction or another. And a tiger is built for exactly that walk. The animal we're circling is the Siberian tiger, Panthera tigris altaica, and here's a number to hold. That cat right now lives in the Russian Far East in country that hits 40 below in winter. 40 below. The same interior Alaska temperatures that people assume would kill a tiger are the temperatures a Siberian tiger already survives, has always survived, sitting just across the water in the Sikhote-Alin Mountains. Interior Alaska and eastern Siberia share the same continental climate. Long, brutal winters, short, hot summers, the same boreal forest, the same river valleys braided with willow and spruce. So put the two facts side by side. A 1,000-mile corridor of walkable land, open for thousands of years, and a cat on the far end of it already adapted to 40 below. Hold those next to each other, because that's the whole geographic argument in two numbers. Nothing had to evolve. Nothing had to adapt. An animal that already handled the Siberian winter only had to keep walking east across ground that everything else was already crossing. And the food was here. This is where people underestimate the interior. A big cat needs big prey, and the Tanana and Yukon valleys are stiff with moose. A bull moose runs 1,400 pounds, and a Siberian tiger's primary prey back in Russia is a deer and boar diet that's smaller than that. You're not asking the cat to make a living on scraps. You're handing it the richest ungulate buffet in the north. More meat per square mile than the country the tiger came from. So if the corridor was open and the climate matched and the prey was bigger and more abundant than home, what exactly is the argument for why the cat stopped at the water's edge? Let me give you the strongest version of that argument, because it's a good one and it nearly wins. The steel man goes like this. The land bridge closed roughly 11,000 years ago when the sea rose, and the Siberian tiger, as we know it genetically, is a young population. It may not have pushed as far north and east as the corridor allowed before the door shut. The megafauna the corridor moved were mostly cold grassland species, mammoth steppe animals, and the deep boreal forest tiger habitat consolidated later. In other words, right animal, right country, maybe wrong timing by a few thousand years. The cat could have crossed. There's no hard proof the population actually did before the water came up. That's a serious objection. I hold it honestly. And here's the crack in it. Absence of a specimen in Alaska proves almost nothing because of how few bones ever survive up there and how little anybody's looked. Think about the detection problem. Interior Alaska is over 170,000 square miles of forest and muskeg and braided river with even now barely a person per several square miles. A dead cat in that country doesn't become a fossil. It gets scavenged in a week, scattered by wolves and wolverines and ravens, and the acidic, boggy soil eats what's left. We have almost no complete carnivore skeletons from that region from the relevant window. We're not finding tiger bones because we're not finding much of anything and we've barely dug. Not enough evidence to confirm the cat crossed. Not enough absence to prove it didn't. That's the real state of it, and anybody who tells you cleaner than that is selling you something. Which brings me back to 11 men on the Tanana in 1854. Because you have to ask what it would actually take to see one of these animals, and the answer is almost impossible luck. A solitary ambush cat in 170,000 square miles of cover doesn't get seen. It sees you. You'd walk that willow scrub for a lifetime and never clock a striped flank at 60 yards unless the cat let you, or you stumbled into its kill at first light with the tracks still crisp in the mud. And that's exactly the shape of the 1854 account. It's not a clean sighting in an open meadow at noon. It's a track, a glimpse in bad light, a dragged carcass. It's the kind of encounter you'd expect from a real animal that doesn't want to be found. Not the kind a hoaxer writes. A liar gives you the whole tiger roaring in the clearing. A witness gives you 9 inches of paw print and a stripe in the brush and a moose hauled 11 feet uphill. And then the animal is gone and never comes back. So here's where I've landed, and it's not where I started. The question was never whether tigers live in Alaska today. They don't. I'm not sending you into the Tanana Flats to look for one. The real question is bigger, and it won't leave me alone. Everything else made that crossing. The door stood open 1,000 miles wide for thousands of years. The cat on the far shore already beats the cold, and the prey on this shore is bigger than home. So what were the actual odds it stayed out? And if just once one cat followed the moose east and lived a season or 10 in country too big and too empty to ever cough up its bones, the 1854 journal isn't a lie. It's the last page of a story the ice already told us was possible. I still go back to that first image. Frozen mud along the Tanana, gray light coming up, a track broader than a man's hand pressed into the ground overnight. The men are standing around it in the cold, breath hanging, and whatever made it is already a mile off in the willows, watching the river. Nobody ever photographs it, nobody ever weighs it. The mud thaws by noon and takes the print with it, and the country closes back over the whole thing like water over a stone.